So we're so excited to welcome today our special guest speaker. We have Joshua Montgomery, who is the founder of Mycroft AI. For those of you who might not know too much about Joshua, he created Mycroft AI to make it so that he created an open source voice assistant software so people can collaborate to create this software and be able to use something that's more private than some of the other softwares that we see nowadays. He created the company back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And he's here to share with us more about his story as the founder. And so we're so grateful to have him here with us today to learn more about his story. So thank you so much, Joshua.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited. It's always fun to be in Honolulu.
So, traveled all the way from Kona?
All the way from Kona, long flight, 30 minutes in the air. The Southwest Airlines has recently started serving the islands. Actually, it's one of the reasons we're here on the islands. And so the inter-island flights are $50, and they're almost universally empty at the moment. So if you're wanting to visit other islands, now is the time, certainly. So yeah, good to be here.
Awesome, great. Well, we're excited to hear about your story. So tell me a little bit about your journey to entrepreneurship. Tell us, how did you become an entrepreneur?
Oh, I got fired. So, I'd always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bent, but I left college and ended up working for a flight simulation company. Was really not happy with defense contracting. I like alliteration, right? And recently, when it comes to ethics, I've been comparing things to pimps, prostitutes, and pornographers. And what I found working in the defense contracting business is that their ethics were significantly lower than one would expect of criminals. And so after a couple of years working for a defense contractor, I decided to step out and do my own thing. We started a company called Retail Navigation. So it's a company that I still wish existed. It only lasted about 2 years. And the idea was to bring search into brick and mortar retail. And so, way back in 2002, we were looking at building kiosks in big box retail stores and other retail stores where you could go and simply have one question answered. And the question is, where is, right? Which is, uniformly what I'm asking when I'm at a big box, right? Like, just yesterday or the day before, I was in the place looking for a new thermostat for our new offices. And I don't know where the thermostats are. Are they with like the speaker components in the electronics aisle, or where? So anyway, so this solved the problem of walking up to it and saying, hey, where are the thermostats? And it would say in aisle 16, bay 2, right? And so anyway, what we neglected to learn when we went out to start that business. And actually, I think we were right and the retailers are wrong. And I think the way that is that a lot of the retailers don't exist anymore. But retailers, they didn't want you to have a convenient shopping experience, right? At the end of the day, the longer they could keep you in the store, the more money they made. The classic case in point of retailing being putting the milk at the back of the grocery store, so you have to walk through the whole grocery store. Meanwhile, you've got these online retailers that are like, hey, how do we make shopping as convenient as possible so that when you need to go buy a widget, you can get on, buy a widget and go about your day, and we deliver it to your home. And so anyway, so since the retailers were measuring their success and how long they kept people in the store, they have a vested interest in not having you be able to find that thermostat. And the business didn't go anywhere. So I went back into aerospace for about a year, went to work for a small aerospace company. And, with only 5 or 6 people there, including the founder, it just became really clear there wasn't room at that company for 2 founders. He really wanted us to go and do, certain contracts and certain development projects. And I was out here in La La Land like, hey, we should pivot and become an ISP, right? And, it just didn't work out. So I totally earned it, right? And so he politely asked me to leave. And at the time I was working on a project called Lawrence Freenet. The idea being we could build a community nonprofit internet service provider. And I ended up doing that full time. That ended up morphing into a local ISP, which I still own, called Wicked Broadband out of Lawrence, Kansas. faster than a flock of flying monkeys, or flocking fast, depending on how you talk about the business. We were doing gigabit fiber to the home before Google made it cool, and continue to serve a big chunk of the university students at KU. And so, yeah, that's been 16 years now. That enabled us to start a co-working space / entrepreneurship center that's not near as nice as this one I'm sitting at Impact Hub here in Honolulu, much smaller. And then out of that effort grew Mycroft, because we wanted to add we wanted to voice enable our co-working space and our makerspace, and nothing existed to do it. So
wow,
we set out to build it ourselves, and that became its own thing. So
no kidding.
So here I am, like 5-6 years later, and we run the open source voice assistant stack for Earth, which is pretty cool. And we're shipping to 59 countries at the moment, and so that's exciting. $1 million worth of pre-orders for our next product out the door. In fact, we stopped taking pre-orders because we just kept digging the hole deeper, and getting ready to go into mass production sometime soon. We just announced our manufacturing partner Tuesday. Aztec out of Malaysia will be making the Mark II, the next generation smart speaker. So we're excited about that. Anyway, that's awesome. A long story about the journey, right? Like it begins with one step, which is getting fired.
Wow, that's incredible. So interesting. How did you have the technological capability to, get started with that?
Aerospace engineer, right? So
yeah.
And then always have been a tinkerer, right? And so even as far, I was building remote control airplanes when I was a kid, when everybody else was out, doing the sports ball. And admittedly, I played soccer, which is sort of sports ball. It's like European sports ball. Everybody else was out doing that. I was playing around with remote control airplanes, working with electronics, building remote control cars, and tinkering around in the lab. And in college, I kind of I don't even know how to say it. I want to say coerced, but that's not the right word. I co-opted one of the labs at the engineering school and got keys for it, and basically lived in it for 2 years, doing projects with the rest of the kids in the aerospace school, many of which were low threat weapons that we used against the law school. So like firing soda cans at Mach 1 or Mach 2 into the concrete at the side of the law school at 3 o'clock in the morning type stuff. The types of hijinks that doesn't involve alcohol or girls. And so, yeah, the tech skills kind of came with that. And then, the entrepreneurship came from a desire to kind of do my own thing. And then the leadership came from the Air Force. So
awesome. So what were like some of the earliest signs of entrepreneurship for you?
I got a copy of Madonna's original tape when I was, I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 when that album came out. Found a bunch of dead tapes from my mom's research projects that she had done as a college student, like all the interviews she'd done as part of her PhD thesis. Wiped them, dubbed the Madonna tape on them, and then went door to door in my neighborhood trying to sell it, because of course I didn't understand copyright law.
Oh, really? How much were those going for?
I don't know, like $1 or something. But my parents had to pull me aside and be like, "Oh, yeah, you can't just copy other people's work and sell it. Sell it." I was like, "Why not? Like, I have blank tapes. I have the original copy." So yeah, like all the way back then, looking for ideas to do new and novel things, and my folks were really big on creating a good work ethic. I had a paper route, for 4 or 5 years when I was a kid. I started working for the Man when I was 15, and had a job all the way through high school, all the way through college. Ended up at my favorite job, which was working at the airport. Still one of my favorite jobs, as the line guy, right? So the guy who drives the tug around and drags the airplanes and parks them and fuels them and like washes the windshields, like kind of like a the guy who services cars at the gas station only for like jets, and for like $8.50 an hour, they'd put me in charge of like $140 million aircraft and be like, yeah, go park that over. You're just like, really? So that was one of my favorite jobs ever, and ended up going from there to a local aircraft manufacturing company, and then on to their engineering operation, and then out of college eventually. So
gotcha. And so what did your parents do for a living? Did that impact your own journey to entrepreneurship in any way?
A little bit. I mean, my dad was a loan officer for SBA, but very much a federal bureaucrat, right? Like,
Okay.
Squared away, 8 to 5. You're done with work. You're done with work. You watch football on weekends and spend time with the family. Really organized and stayed would be a good word for my dad. And then my mom was a professor. So now she did later on get into entrepreneurship. She started a company called Tailored Care, which is based in St. Louis now. That took her research into elderly care and supporting caregivers for Alzheimer's patients. So the idea being, when you have two folks living together, one of whom has Alzheimer's, almost universally the other spouse becomes the caregiver. And one of the things that causes the spouse with Alzheimer's to end up in a care home is that not that the person in need of care really has reached a breaking point, but it's because the caregiver has. And so by providing resources to caregivers, not necessarily to the person who's ill, you can actually extend the amount of time that they're able to stay at home, which is, a mitzvah. It's a blessing to the person with the disease, but also, saves a ton of money for the insurance company because you don't have that person institutionalized. So she started that company 7 or 8 years ago and came to me, I want to say about 5-6 years ago, and said, "You do all this startup stuff. Like, how come you never help me?" And I reached into my network, helped her find a CEO to come and run that. He's taken it. I think he's completely bought her out, or mostly bought her out at this point. He's running that out of St. Louis really successfully. He's raised quite a bit of money. They're doing a lot of good work in the industry. And at the end of the day, that business is helping people who in need stay home longer, which is really exciting. So my mom has an entrepreneurial bent to her as well. She didn't really find it until she was in her 60s, but we all figure it out someday, right? It's definitely been in the family recently anyway.
Gotcha. Wow, that's really interesting. So maybe share with us a few of the challenges. It sounds like it kind of comes naturally to you, but have there been some obstacles along the way?
Oh yeah. I mean, at the ISP, we decided to start an internet company in the most converged media market in the United States. So the competitor in the Lawrence market is a company called the World Company. They actually had a globe as a logo, and owned by a family that had owned the newspaper since the early 1900s. But they didn't only know the news, they owned the local newspapers, so, right? They controlled the news cycle. They also controlled the local television news, right? So they controlled that news cycle, plus all of the local journals. So like the local wedding journal and the county monthly where they pictures of beautiful homes, that type of thing. So basically, if it was printed in the community, it came off of their printing press, Sunflower Press. And then they also own the cable provider, right? And they were the major internet provider within the community, right? So a huge employer, controls the news cycle. Vast majority of their money are coming from their internet service. And we decided hey, with no resources and no experience, we're going to take this company on, right? And raising money was really challenging for that project. It's fairly technically challenging to build internet service in a way that is cost effective. And then, of course, politically, it was extremely challenging because, you need the municipality to participate when you're building these high-speed networks. And, when the other guy owns the newspaper and controls the news cycle, it makes it really difficult for politicians to say yes to what you're trying to do. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges there. That company didn't mature to what it would have been in a community that didn't have converged media. And in my view, it's a really strong argument for, effectively breaking up Facebook, Google, and others. When too much media power comes into the hands of a single company, it makes it enormously difficult to compete. And as a result, you end up with, stunted companies that really aren't as effective as they are in media markets or in nations that have competitive markets. And so anyway, so the ISP, it was successful enough to pay for itself. It was successful enough to, pay mortgages and keep our employees squared away, and successful enough to fund our entrepreneurship center, which is where new ideas came from. And then at Mycroft, once again, when we got into the smart speaker, space, I used to have to explain to people what it was, right? I'd be like, hey, we're out raising money for our company. We're building an artificial intelligence into a speaker, right? Because there wasn't even really a word for it yet. And I'd be like, what? And I'm like, well, it's a speaker and it sits in the corner and it listens to you, and then you talk to it and it does stuff. And even if it's playing music, you can still talk to it and it does stuff. And people were like, what are you talking about? Like the Star Trek thing? Like, did you come from like a convention, right? Like that is gonna, and I had really experienced VCs, like the guys that are like kings of Silicon Valley that everybody's like, oh my goodness, you're always right. Look at me and be like, nobody's ever gonna want one of these things. It's a niche market, right? Like the smart speaker thing is like, you're way too early. And then, 9 months later, Amazon did a Super Bowl ad with Alec Baldwin to announce the Amazon Echo. And literally overnight, like over the weekend, like from the Friday to the Monday, the conversation I had with investors on Friday was, it's a niche market. Nobody's ever going to want it. Why would we invest in this? To Monday, it is the biggest market ever. And you're going to be competing against Amazon and Google. And oh my God, we don't do that in the venture capital space. Like we want greenfield opportunities. Like anything that Google and Apple are targeting heavily, like we don't want anything to do with, right? And so yeah, that created some challenges, but it also created a bunch of opportunities, right? Because the smart speaker space is the fastest growing segment of the technology market. In fact, it's the fastest growing technology in the history of mankind, right? So the prior fastest growing tech was these things, smartphones, right? If you remember in 2006, 2007, when they launched the iPhone and the original T-Mobile G1, nobody had a smartphone. And then 24 months later, everyone you knew had a smartphone, right? Yeah. A lot of them had like the Palm one, or the I can't even remember the name of the company, the BlackBerry ones.
Oh yeah,
right?
I remember those.
But the BlackBerry, iPhone, Palm had some play in it. Microsoft actually at the beginning of that was the biggest player in the smartphone operating system market with Nokia. And the market grew and grew and grew, and everybody had one overnight, and that happened globally, right? And it made these huge changes to the way that we live, right? The idea that you have a device in your pocket that's got two cameras, it's always connected to the internet, it's GPS enabled, right? It can run a full operating system, enabled so many businesses. Like, Uber and Lyft, they didn't realize it when they got into the business originally, but they eventually realized that, they were in the transportation business, and that the GPS made it possible for you to call a ride wherever you were. Like that was the sum total of the innovation at Uber. The insight that, hey, with the GPS connected to the network in your pocket, you can call a ride wherever you want. And they took that and they built, this huge, global company. Same with Lyft coming up at the same time. The smart speakers are very much the same thing, and they're growing faster, right? Smart speaker adoption has eclipsed the rate of smart speaker adoption has eclipsed the rate of the adoption of reading and writing. And so,
Wow.
It became this really huge opportunity, and where there were originally not a bunch of, but several companies that were trying to compete in the space, all of which have been bought. It turned out that there's a niche for a company that cares about two things: openness, so you can do what you want to do with it.
Right.
It's an agent for the person who owns it. So it's a concept of user agency, where when you buy even a phone, right? The phone doesn't represent you. It represents the phone company, right? It represents, in this case, Google. It's a device for them to learn about me so that they can market their products to me. It doesn't act in my best interest.
Even though it says iPhone.
Yeah. Hey, like the iPhone serves Apple, right? It doesn't serve you.
Right.
And that for a number of different reasons, but and it's the same with the smart speaker market. The smart speaker that's sitting in your kitchen, it serves the company that built it, right? Their idea is, how much can we learn about this person? How much can we learn about their behavior? How close can we get to this person so that we can market products and goods that we sell, or products and goods that we sell for other people, right?
Right.
It doesn't serve you. You don't have access to the operating system. Like you couldn't get into it if they deliberately disabled it. You don't have any idea what's going on in that little black box, right? What you do know is that when you go through and you mention a scene from a TV show that you just watched where somebody ended up in handcuffs, that all of the advertising in your media feeds turned to BDSM ads, right? You know that.
Right.
And I've heard similar stories. That's supposed to be a joke, but didn't land. And so in the
landing.
Delayed landing. Yeah, sorry. with a smart speaker, so the idea that it's open, that the speaker's an agent for you as the owner, was really kind of the original concept.
Yeah.
And then as the other companies got more heavily involved in surveillance, right, it became really clear that there's an opportunity to build technologies that counter that, right? A technology that's private, that acts for you, that doesn't store your information, that's not an agent to try and sell you something else. And it turns out there's a really sizable segment of the general public that is really fed up with being spied on 24/7 and is looking for opportunities to use technology without giving over their privacy and their agency.
Awesome. So I know that's such a big part of it. So how does it protect privacy more so than other pieces of technology? Does it actually like destroy the data that it's gathering, or does it, or is it that
we don't gather any data that we don't need to serve the current query, right? So when somebody asks a question, we'll go out to Wikipedia or to Wolfram Alpha or wherever the data source is and try to answer that question. How tall is the Eiffel Tower, for example? Right. And we keep that data just as long as we need to keep it to answer your question, and then the whole thing disappears from the system. Mm-hmm. And we do that by default. It's not something that users have to go dig through a menu somewhere to check a checkbox. Yeah. Out of the box, we don't store anything. And then in order to improve the AI and the underlying algorithms, we ask people affirmatively, hey, do you want to participate as somebody who's donating your data to the broader community to improve the technology? And, about 5% of our user base says, yeah, I trust you guys and I want to make the technology better. I'm willing to opt in. And just by changing that one paradigm that by default they opt out, and if they choose to affirmatively opt in, they can, it adds this huge layer of privacy. The other thing that we do to add privacy is that we're transparent. So all of the software is published, our developer syncs that we have in-house, we actually put video of them on the internet so you can actually see our developers debating the features and the software that they're building. Yeah. People can come through and audit the code and say, okay, this is everything that's running. Okay, there's nothing in here that's sending data back to Mycroft. And, where you compare that with the other technologies out there where everything's a black box, everything's super secret, they use cryptography to lock up all their software and their microchips. They do some open source stuff, but they develop it in-house and kind of throw it over the wall. They don't work with a community to figure out how to build better tech. All of those things, on the privacy side really tilt in our favor. And we feel that the era of surveillance capitalism has a limited lifetime. Right? At some point, regulators and the general public and others are going to object and say, hey, look, you can't just spy on people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and use that to build, these monolithic monopoly empires. Like, it's just not going to be permitted. And you're already starting to see that with regulators beginning to step in. I mean, just last week, I guess Google's being indicted for stealing $100 million worth of wages from their employees. You saw Facebook get a $5 billion fine for the Cambridge Analytica thing. Apple just lost a lawsuit to Epic. I mean, there's just this litany of actions that are starting to be taken on behalf of the public to promote privacy. And, we're a very small part of that in just one of these markets, but we think that it creates a really big opportunity.
Oh, that's awesome. So I know that, and you mentioned earlier that Mycroft recently entered an agreement with a contract manufacturer, Aztec Global. So what does that mean for the company?
Sure. So we already made one version of our smart speaker, the Mark I. It was kind of like a Wall-E looking device. It was really cute, had the two little eyes on the front. And the idea of that was to really, extend the platform to a bunch of developers, encourage those people to opt in. Many of them did, so that we could start collecting the data that we need to improve the underlying AI. And then we also put in place a bunch of tools that would allow the community not only to donate the data, but also to help us process the data. So when somebody said, I'm playing Minecraft, or I bought something from Microsoft and it set off the speaker, right? Because it misheard it. For people who opted in, we collected that data. Another member of our community went in and listened to it and said, oh, okay, they said Microsoft, not Minecraft, or they said Microsoft, not Mycroft. They tagged it that way, it fed back to the AI and it improved the algorithm. And everybody in that process explicitly opted in, from the person who donated to the data to the person who processed the data. Yeah. And so, the Mark I, we sold about 2,000 units. We shipped over 50 countries. And we built it entirely in-house. I think we sold them for 200 and they cost us like 2,000 each to make. Like people got a great discount on them. And then so we moved forward with the next generation, which is the Mark II. We've recently started shipping the Mark II dev kits to backers. Those are laser cut enclosures, but all the electronics are almost identical to what'll ship in the retail device. And then, now the design work's done, now that we got developers building software, the next step is to start mass production. And that's something that we're not really configured for, and it's something that's increasingly difficult to do in the United States, mostly because we no longer have the skills. So the U.S. exported all of our expertise in retail mass production to China and Southeast Asia, and at the time we moved the state-of-the-art factories over there. The problem is, since then, the state-of-the-art has improved significantly, but it didn't improve here, it improved there, right? And so the engineers and the manufacturers in Shenzhen, and in our case Malaysia, are just orders of magnitude better than anything you can buy in the United States for a reasonable price. And it's important I put that last piece in there, because the US still makes probably the best medical electronics and the best defense electronics in the world. We just can't make a smartphone for $110, right? And so Aztec Global is a company based out of Singapore. They have factories in both Malaysia and Mexico. They specialize in building mass production electronics, and they can take our device that we're shipping in the hundreds and put it through a manufacturing process that allows us to ship hundreds of thousands. And so, the partnership with Aztec is what takes us from being what's effectively an R&D company that's developing and building this technology in partnership with the global community, to a company where you can buy their products in, your local big box retailer. So that's really exciting for us, because it's a sea change in the business. It goes from a business that burns money to a business that actually generates money. So that's exciting.
Awesome. So that sounds exciting. I also know that Mycroft launched a second regulation crowdfunding campaign with Start Engine.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the company need to do another raise, and why is the democratization of investing important to Mycroft?
Yeah. So they have so people in sales will recognize the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, right? The first 5 minutes of which is Alec Baldwin seems to come up a lot in smart speakers. Is a monologue by Alec Baldwin that's really famous among salespeople, where he says, "Always be closing," right? And in a startup that's venture backed, the mantra becomes "always be raising." Yeah. And so when you look at companies and you look at the modern, the bigger tech companies, you'll see that, in Facebook's case, I think they raised like a $12 million A. Importantly, and what's something people don't realize is that, the three founders of Facebook each got $1 million check right out of the gate in the A round, right? And the thinking was, we want you guys to be focused on growing the company, not on paying your mortgage. So we're going to give you enough money that you don't even have to think about that. We want you to do nothing but focus on building this company for the next however many years. And that worked out really well for investors in Facebook. Guys like Peter Thiel and others, became billionaires. Mark Zuckerberg, in some ways, it dominates the conversation about media globally today, right? But they raised money in discrete rounds. So you have an A and a B and a C and a D and an E and an F. And in each round, companies typically raise more money, and they raise it at a higher valuation. And, the reasoning behind that is because when you start a company, if you went out in, Uber's case, right? And I don't know how much money Uber burned, but it was like $10 billion before they went public, right? And I think they're still burning money. I don't think they're profitable. If they raised all that money on the first day of operations, like there wouldn't be any equity left for the employees or the founders, right? Like if somebody's investing $10 billion in your startup and you've got 3 employees, they're going to want 99.99% of the stock, right? So by raising money in discrete rounds at, increasing valuations, it allows you to only peel off a small percentage of the business for each individual round. So in our case, we did an angel round where we sold right around 10% of the business for $350,000. We then went on to do a seed round, which I was just looking at the books today. It was like a $2.1 million seed. We did which was to a number of different outside angels, mostly non-professional investors, although we did end up with like 7 or 8 small venture capital firms in there. We went out and did an original Reg CF to give our community an opportunity to participate. And then, we were on our way to do what's called a Reg A, right? Not a Reg A, a Series A, right? Which is a round that you do as you're beginning to generate revenue and as you're starting to show growth. For an A for our company, 5 million is a really great target. I have a friend who's raising 20 with a lot fewer employees and a lot less revenue, and has been fairly successful with it. So we're kind of on the lower side of a Series A. And we're doing it through Regulation CF because it's now possible, right? One of the things that's been really exciting, and I think that other founders should sit up and pay attention to, is that over the last 5 or 6 years, you've had a number of new fundraising tools stand up. It used to be so back in the 90s, the way that you did this is you raised a Reg D, like $1 million is what Amazon did. They raised a little venture round, and by a little venture round, I mean they got $40 million from John Doerr, right? And then in 1997, they went public. And if you bought money in their public offering, which they did after only 2 rounds of financing for, I think the offering was like $12, that $12 investment's now worth $3,400, right, as at today's market prices. And so that's the way that things used to be done, but people got really crazy with that in the late 90s. And so Congress passed a law called Sarbanes-Oxley, which made it much, much harder for companies to go public, right? And what happened after that is that companies stayed private longer, right? And so Coinbase is a great example that just went public at like a $50 billion valuation. So, Coinbase, one of actually our investors, Albert Langer at Union Square Ventures, who's invested in us personally, not through his fund. Let me highlight that. Invested in Coinbase through his fund in their A or their B round, probably not a lot of money. And then they did an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, and an F. And at every step, the value of the company went up and up and up. And so by the time they went public and, Joe Public was able to buy shares in the company, most of the growth in the company was gone, right? And so the types of returns that Amazon investor got in 1997 for an investor in Coinbase that was starting him like 10 years later, there's no way they get those returns because the company's already worth $50 billion by the time the investment becomes available. So now there's these great new tools called Reg CF and Reg A Plus that allow a company to go out, and we did our first Reg CF when the max was $1,070,000. I have no idea why it was $1,070,000, not $1 million flat, but whatever, it was the regulatory limit. You could raise up to that, and we went out and did, and that allowed anybody in our community, anybody in our friends and family network to come and participate and invest in the company before all that growth happened, right? And then just last year, Congress updated that law and said, hey, you can now raise $5 million. And that was really great for us because, we're in the process of going out for an A, and the choices are, go to those same venture capital investors out on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley who backed Google and think it's a great idea that Facebook is spying on everybody because, of course, that's what's paid for their private helicopters, their private yachts, their jets, and their, all of their toys, right? Surveillance capitalism has been really great for Silicon Valley venture investors, right? And, when you read about Silicon Valley companies and how they go bad, right? In almost every case, you can see an example of some investor who was being a D-bag and pushed the company to go do something that was unethical or something that didn't fit within the founder's vision, in order to make a quick buck or in order to make more money in the long run. And so going to, venture capital investors, really runs the danger of you're putting somebody inside your company whose values and interests might not necessarily align with the founders. Yeah. And it's something that's important to note about venture capital investors, that people don't really think about is a typical venture fund's lifetime is 10 years. So, a venture capitalist goes out and raises whatever it is, $100 million, and they need to invest that in businesses and they need to have their returns within 10 years. Because if it runs past 10 years, right, that fund becomes a hangnail fund. It becomes what's called a zombie fund or a zombie company. They're having to continue to manage it after the fund is effectively over. What they're looking for is to take that $100 million and invest it in 25 or 50 companies. They need one to go out and be Facebook or Uber or Lyft or, any of the other Silicon Valley darlings. They'd love to have some of the other ones perform, but what they don't want is a company that kind of grows slowly over 10 years, might be profitable, maybe has 50 or 100 employees, has a little segment of the market, but it really is never going to be a great return on them. And the founder wants to run it until they retire, right? That's not their nightmare, but in many cases, they would rather have the company go out of business, right? And so I've had sophisticated investors at like real VC firms tell me, hey, look, we're looking for a rocket or a crater. We don't want anything in between. And, as a founder, right, being on a rocket's great, although you have to kind of question how, money does not make you happy, right? Like you kind of have to question, how some of these guys feel about what happened to them after they made a bunch of money. Being on a rocket's great. Being in a crater, like, suicide, depression, long-term effects of that to the founder are pretty catastrophic in many cases. And so, taking money from venture capitalists really is a two-edged sword. So anyway, so in our case, this past year, we've really been at a decision-making point. My partner founded Stellar Semiconductor, sold it for $140 million to Broadcom in 2000. Then he founded Cryptic Studios, which made a really well-known, massively multiplayer online game called City of Heroes. He sold that to Atari for $50 million in like 2010. In the first case, he took venture money. In the second case, he used his own money. He has a really unique perspective on this. So, this past year, he'd been writing checks to keep the company funded, and we had to make a decision, like, are we going to go, the venture route, or are we going to go to our broader community and raise this money, using Reg CF, which allows anybody to invest? And, at the beginning of that conversation where the max on Reg CF was $1 million, like that's a really hard discussion because we really can't get to where we need to be with $1 million, right? And then Congress, for once in its life, reached out and saved us and changed the cap to 5 million. And so now you can actually raise what's a significant amount of money to keep your company going, and do that with smaller investors, each of which is taking less risk, right? So that kind of eliminates the need to have a rocket or a crater, right? And then also each of which may be investing for reasons other than, I just want to make as much money as I can for my limited partners, my LPs, as venture capitalists do. And so that's been a real blessing for us, as we've had people come in and invest who believe in privacy, who believe in user agency, and then, just people who believe smart speakers are in their infancy, and that there really is a place in this huge market for, a company that focuses on privacy. And so, we've been really blessed with that. We've been really lucky with it. And the new Reg CF has gone really, really well. We're at like 360 something thousand today, and after less than 6 weeks, and that's really kind of the rate we need to be raising to do what we want to do. So we're excited by that, and looking forward to having more people join join the crowd and kind of help us to get where we need to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, that was a lot of pontificating on all kinds of cool things. I think they're cool, but about fundraising, right? I'm sure there are VCs, if there are VCs listening to this, shaking their heads saying, that's not true.
Well, I appreciate the different perspectives. Kind of looking at like Hawaii and your decision to move here, what was it that you saw in living and growing the business here?
Sure. So we've got founded in Kansas City. We still maintain a presence in Kansas City.
Yeah.
It's a good market, but it became really clear early on in the company we wouldn't be able to raise the kind of money and access the kind of talent that we needed if we were in the Midwest.
Okay.
And they have a saying: Groupon would never ever have been funded in Silicon Valley, and Facebook would never have been funded in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Groupon was a business that developed, created instant cash. It didn't have a lot of network effects or barriers to entry. But it was very profitable very early on, and that's the type of thing that Midwest investors love. Right. Facebook didn't even have a business plan. Their whole idea was, we're going to grow, and we'll figure out how to make money later. But there are network effects and barriers to entry, right? So we got out of the Midwest really quickly, and I went to, I want to say like 35 cities all over the US and Europe, and I met with both investors and with entrepreneurs in those cities and said, to the investors, like, what do you invest in and why? Like, what are your interests? Like, what's your thesis? And got a lot of information there. And then from the entrepreneurs, I asked a lot of questions, but one of the big ones was, where do you get your money? Right. And, even as far away as Lithuania, right, the answer was, we get our money from Silicon Valley. Right. And so, at the end of that, we ended up settling in the Valley. We went through a startup accelerator called 500 Startups, which is at Fifth and Mission. They've invested in 6,000 companies now, of which 33 are unicorns worth more than $1 billion. Great team over at 500 to help us grow. And that was a really great experience. And we ended up living in Palo Alto, and it was so expensive living in the Valley. And the thesis was, if you're in the Valley, you get all these network effects of having all these other companies around you. This is where all the funds are raised, so on and so forth. but what we noticed when we were there was there was a lot of changes. A lot of the reasons that people live in the valley is the quality of life. But, one of the big things that's changed there, and you guys have it here in Honolulu, not in Kona. If you want to come to Kona, you should move to Kona. It's beautiful. No traffic. The traffic in Silicon Valley is really brutal. And, what we found is that we were working from home and we never left, right? Like you couldn't go out and, if you never want to get anywhere, get on the 101, right? And, from 7 a.m. until about 10 a.m., you couldn't get anywhere. And then again, from like 4 p.m. until 9 p.m., like everything was like, even the residential neighborhood streets were all backed up. We were paying, and I know people in Hawaii feel this pain, we were paying $6,000 a month for a 3-bedroom house and this is true. The house was so terrible that 5 months after we moved out, it burned down in the middle of the night of its own accord with the family in it. And they got out, don't get me wrong, but total loss. And we're paying $6,000 a month for that. And then another $6,000 a month for private school for the kids. And, the combination of those things with the traffic and what effectively ended up being fairly low quality of life, we were just like, well, there has to be a better way, right? And, the following year, Mycroft shipped into 59 countries. One of the things that we needed to do was build international language support. So we took a year-long trip we took the kids, we hired a tutor and brought her with us. And we did 22 cities in 13 countries over the course of a year. Fortunately, we did that pre-COVID. I don't even think it's possible now. We stayed in Airbnbs and neighborhoods for the entire trip. We went out and built, developer communities for Mycroft in languages from Icelandic to Catalan to Mandarin to Australian, which is a totally different language from English. I stand by that statement. And the Aussies speak completely different. So we went out and built community in all these cities. And at the end of it, one of the places we came to was Hawaii because, when we were in Catalonia, Catalan is a very discrete language from Spanish. They have a separatist movement that's really created a lot of waves in northern Spain. And we have something very similar going on here in Hawaii with the revival of the Hawaiian language and a full-on separatist movement, here in Hawaii. And so one of the things that we were really excited about was building a voice assistant that speaks Hawaiian, right? And so anyway, so we came here and we realized, a couple of things were happening. And these are really weird reasons to move someplace. But Amazon Prime delivers here the same way they do everywhere else. And that's important for a company like us that does research because we can get odds and ends and bits and parts that we're never going to be able to get locally at a reasonable price and still build the things that we're trying to build without being limited in our supply chain. So that's actually important. Southwest Airlines had just announced that they were going to serve the islands. And, having been in several communities that were served by Southwest, we realized pretty quickly that number one, Hawaiian Airlines would no longer be the biggest, one of the biggest companies in the States. They're going to get eaten alive. But then number two, that Southwest Airlines would make, well, actually they just launched service to Phoenix and Las Vegas this month. And so they have now opened up 50 cities in the United States that you can get back and forth for $159 each way from, where we are in Kona, which means that we're effectively adjacent to, everywhere. I mean, it's no longer just, what's Honolulu adjacent to the West Coast and New York and Boston, maybe with Hawaiian Airlines, we're now adjacent to 50 cities going all the way to the East Coast, right? And so if I need to get to Boise, Idaho tomorrow, I can do that. So that was hugely important to us. And then the cost of living here. If you're from Kansas City, the cost of living here looks pretty extreme. But, when we were in Palo Alto, there was a 1-acre commercial zone lot at the end of our block, empty, vacant, that sold for $10 million for a 1-acre lot. And it didn't have an ocean view. It was not something fancy. It was a vacant lot by a cemetery. And, because of course, Tesla's headquarters were a block away, Nest's headquarters were a block away, LinkedIn had a huge campus right next door. There was a McLaren dealership at the end of the street. And, we looked at that and then we looked at what we were paying for rent and we looked at these tear down houses going for $2.5 million in bidding wars, right? And then we looked at the Big Island and we're like, wow. And we ended up with a 5-acre coffee farm with a 6-bedroom, 4-bathroom house for half of what we would have bought a tear down in the valley with, pretty decent schools and, obviously great weather, no traffic. That's pretty powerful. there are some downsides to being in Hawaii, and I think that there are things that the startup community and the legislature needs to address, especially relative to doing business in states that are more business friendly. But it's a pretty awesome place to live. And the final thing that we thought about was recruiting, and we're looking for men and women who are early on in their careers, right, that we can afford, who are coming out with deep technical skills. 15, 20 years ago, that entire set, right, like the highly technical, like super ambitious men and women coming out of Ivy League schools, they all went to Wall Street, right? Right up until 2007, when people realized that Wall Street was, fraudulently defrauding basically everybody, and the reputation of Wall Street went into the tank, right? And then they switched. They all went to the Valley, right? So they all went to work for the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks of the world. And, now those companies are running into a lot of the same reputation. Like, who brags about working at Facebook? Like, you hide that you work at Facebook at this point. I mean, maybe there are people out there that are super proud of it, but like, I spy on my neighbors for money. In a lot of the country, that's a real significant issue. I mean, I wouldn't brag about working at Facebook. Okay. And if Zuck wants to talk about it, I'd be happy to talk about it. But, so there's some reputational things there. And then there's also the quality of life things there, right? Like, if you want to go work for Facebook, you're going to end up living in, Palo Alto, Mountain View, all these costs of living, all this traffic, if they call it Man Jose, right? It's called Man Jose because, and this is true, man. Like, two things I noticed when I was walking down the street one night in Mountain View. One is that every single store on the main street in Mountain View had a help wanted sign on it. And the reason was because nobody who was willing to work for like a $25 or a $30 an hour wage, which is what they're paying, could possibly afford to live within a 2-hour drive of the job. And so, all of the service sector positions that make it enjoyable to be, upper middle class America, like, what good is it to have a bunch of money if you can't find a plumber, right? Like, so they all had help wanted. And then I swear to God, I was walking with my wife and we looked around and every single person on the street was male, all of them. And it's because there is such a really heavy male to female ratio problem in tech and in the Valley. And so when you're looking at hiring talent that's coming out of these schools that want to be in a community that has great quality of life, that's reasonably inexpensive to live, that has work-life balance, which is increasingly important for people coming out of schools, and is looking to find a spouse, this is the place to be. And so, we're not having any problems getting applications when we're putting jobs on the street. And so, as we build this company, the problems that we're running into is, office space is a problem. Although here in Honolulu, you don't have the office space. Just come join Impact Hub. Like, I would be here every day if I was here in Honolulu. Office space has been a bit of a trouble, and then the housing crisis here is, catastrophic. It's catastrophic here, and so we're looking at having to build housing in order to hire people, which is, a huge problem. So anyway, but we are here and we are excited to be here, and those are solvable problems. So anyway,
sounds great. Well, that's good news, I think, for Hawaii and Honolulu, and sounds like the Big Island as well.
The Big Island, definitely the Big Island.
That's your personal.
That's that's where I put my money where my mouth is. That's where we decided to be. So
awesome. I think we've got time for one more question before we move into the rapid fire segment.
Sure.
So what would be some suggestions you have for aspiring entrepreneurs? Maybe people who are interested in starting a business in the future, or maybe someone who's like in the first year or two of starting a business.
Sure.
What would your biggest piece of advice be for them?
Oh, the biggest piece is easy. It's Walt Disney. Stop talking, start doing. Right. It's one of my favorite quotes of anybody out there. It's easy to pontificate and talk about we're going to do this, and to plan, we're going to do this. Brad Feld, who runs, who's a venture capitalist at the Founder Group out of Boulder, he says, people always send him financial projections, and his response is the only financial projections I've ever seen that were correct were the ones that projected zero. And so, financial projections in the absence of data are just a waste of time and effort. If you do have to do some reasonable planning, but a lot of times you can do that in the form of a bullet list on a single page, and then go out and start acquiring data, like, go sell your product, right? start doing. I have a great friend runs a company called Super Dispatch out of Kansas City. I think he's like 150 or 200 employees now, doing data work inside the trucking industry. And in Beck's case, they wanted to build an app that would, and this is something that'd be useful for Hawaii. I don't know if he works with retail shippers or not, but all it does is track cars that people are shipping within the car shipping industry, because it turns out that was a heavily paper process. And he wanted to know if these shipping companies would be willing to buy an app where, instead of filling out a bunch of, and they're like faxing documents back and forth and whatever, he wanted to know whether they would buy an application to do this. And so instead of building the app, he built a wireframe of the app. And instead of going out and marketing his, building it first, taking it to market, he hired a salesman and started calling these people and say, hey, we got this great app, and doing a demo online and seeing if they'd want to buy. And they did. And after he sold a certain number of things, and he took their money too. Like, he took their money, he put it in an account. He did it for about 90 days. He gave everybody their money back, closed that brand, right? And then went off and started his company, because, and Beck, if you're listening to this and I told that wrong, then get in the things and correct me. But I'm pretty sure that's the story, that as I understand it. And so the moral of the story is, you can do a smoke test like that and test to see if anybody wants to buy your product without actually building your product. And the biggest waste in entrepreneurship, in my view, are people who go and chase ideas or build technologies that nobody wants and nobody's willing to pay for, right? Is that you, as the entrepreneur, you fall in love with your retail navigation idea, and you want to put the kiosk in all of the Home Depots and the Walmarts of the world. And what you don't know is that the Home Depots and the Walmarts of the world want people lost in their stores so they can sell them more products. And so, in my case, I went out and spent, not a huge amount of money, but tens of thousands of dollars building this technology, building partnerships with Ace Hardware to try and get this thing out into the world. And at the end of it, the world didn't want it, And so when I look back at that and I say, okay, well, what could I have done better? Well, I didn't even need to I could have had a really nice pitch deck and just gone and pitched all these guys. And eventually one of them would have, pulled me into a room and said, hey, dude, we want our customers to be lost. Right. And I would have corrected him and said, Amazon's going to eat your lunch, because Amazon wants their customers to be happy. But anyway, I could have learned that for a lot less money. And so stop talking, start doing would be my biggest piece of advice. And, it's the same in poker, right? Fold early, fold often, right? If you don't have pocket rockets, right? If you don't have a hand that can win, fold and do something new. And the question is how fast and cheap can you get to that fold so that you can go and pursue, an idea that is the next Facebook or is the next Lyft or Uber, because those ideas are out there. I mean, there are, billion-dollar empires ready to be built today. And there are people pursuing them. But unfortunately, there's people out there pursuing terrible ideas, that could be pursuing those same billion-dollar opportunities. So fold early, fold often, quit talking, start doing. That's my lightning round response.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll move into the rapid fire segment. So I've got 21 quick questions for you. You can just go one or the other, and we'll get started. So first one is cats or dogs?
Cats.
Beer or wine?
Diet Mountain Dew.
Favorite app?
Favorite app? Oh, wow. Right now, I would argue Vivaldi as a web browser that's privacy focused.
Okay. Favorite car?
I just bought a Tesla Model Y 2 days ago, which will be here in March.
Favorite book?
The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein, 1964.
Favorite movie or TV show?
Oh, goodness. What movie have I watched a gazillion times over? You know what? My current favorite movie is Chef. With the entire cast of the original Iron Man. They shot it after they shot Iron Man, right? Super low-key movie. Oh, nobody gets shot. Nobody gets dismembered. It's all about family and food. And if you have not watched it, go watch it. It's fantastic. Jon Favreau is great.
Let's see here. Favorite artist?
Oh, I would probably say Nagal, probably at the moment. Like, I'm thinking about the art for the new office and thinking like 80s inspired, simplicity. We'll see.
Okay. Your go-to karaoke song.
Oh goodness, I don't do karaoke. Under Pressure, David Bowie, and goodness, his name just flew out of my head. David Bowie and Freddie Mercury.
Okay. What TV sitcom family would you be a member of?
Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty. I would be somewhere in there.
Is there anything you collect?
Wow. Yes, I do. I have stickers from almost every city, makerspace, and hackerspace I've been to on the back of my laptop, if you see it over there. So.
Okay. Any unusual skills or talents?
Unusual skills or talents? Yeah, one of the things I did early on and continue to have had to do at the internet service provider is tower work. So just in the last 2 years, at least one occasion, you found me 250 feet up a telecommunications tower hanging off a radio, helping somebody with a problem. Not something that I ever envisioned doing as an executive.
Any unusual skills or talents?
I think that was it.
Oh, if a movie was made of your life, what genre would it be? Who would play you?
Oh, Zach Galifianakis, and it would probably be a comedy.
Okay. What was your first job?
My first job ever was frying tacos at, I can't even remember the place, like sitting in front of the fryer, frying tacos. Oh, I had a paper out when I was a kid too, so.
Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm regularly tempted, and you would not imagine how tempted to pack up my stuff and go down to Boca Chica and go to work for SpaceX. Very, very tempted. If they would have me, I'm very tempted. I've only applied for jobs a few times in the last 20 years. But periodically, I get upset, and the only place I ever apply is SpaceX. So, and I got interviews there too. I just have never pulled the trigger.
Ah, gotcha. What is the best compliment someone can give you?
Mostly harmless.
Mostly harmless. A cause you are passionate about?
The charity that we back is a charity out of Nepal that's started by a woman who, in her gap year between high school and college, Maggie Doyle, started a home for an orphanage that is now a women's school. And it just totally escaped me what the name of her charity is. But yeah, it's the one that it's the one when we have extra money, we send it to Maggie.
Great. Who are 5 people alive or dead that you would want to have dinner with?
Alive or dead that I would want to have dinner with?
Yes.
Blink Now is the name of the charity. Blinknow.org. Alive or dead that I would want to have dinner with? I would love to sit down and have dinner with Barack Obama. I think that would be fantastic. I would love to sit down and have dinner with both Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, although probably in separate rooms. I may someday have the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with Elon Musk. I think that would be a huge opportunity. And then, I guess, at the end of the day, people who've made substantial contributions to science, but have also had problems with ethics. So, I think J. Robert Oppenheimer would be somebody that would be an interesting person to have a conversation with.
Awesome. What is one thing on your bucket list?
On my bucket list, I would like to go to space. Now that I can buy seats on a thing, that's exciting.
What is the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
Oh, the strangest thing? I haven't gone for anything particularly weird. This is not the world's weirdest thing, but you heard me say that we went to 22 cities. in 2 separate cities, in 2 separate languages. I managed to buy tuna fish pizza at the store, because of course when you go to the store in Taiwan, like there's no English on anything, and it's all like these really loud pink and orange pictures with all these characters on them. And so I didn't actually eat the pizza, but tuna fish pizza is right up there. But of course, you know, all the standards, escargot and all that fun stuff too. So yeah.
That was the closest you ever got.
Yeah.
If you could trade lives with anyone for a day, who would it be?
Anyone for a day. Do they have to be alive?
We'll let you decide that.
I don't know. Like my mind runs towards relaxation. So I mean, I think it would be interesting to trade places with Jerry Garcia for a day, maybe someday in like the mid 1970s. I don't know. There's I'd be curious to see what that life was like.
Okay. And if you had access to a time machine, where and when would you go?
Oh, wow. Well, I would probably go to the future, and I would like to be there, you know, the day that they declare Mars self-sufficient. I don't think the people who want to go to Mars on the first trip, I don't think those people are thinking very carefully. Like, you think a camper van's bad, at least you know, or Antarctica's bad, like at least you can breathe the air. Like Mars is like 5% perchlorate in the soil, which is super toxic. And the sun is really dim and it's cold and there's no air pressure. And like, I think it's going to be a pretty terrible place to live for the first decade or two. But the day that they declare it self-sufficient, where it's actually standing on its own 2 feet, I think that would be a fun day a fun party to attend. I think that's going to be an exciting day, and the culmination of what's almost certainly going to be decades of work of really dedicated people. So
awesome. Well, you made it through our rapid fire segment.
I don't really do rapid fire answers. I'm sorry. I'll try next time.
No, it was great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Joshua. We really appreciated having you here with us. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. Also want to give a big shout out to the Hub for sponsoring this and for sharing your wonderful space with us. I know you like it too, Joshua.
I did. I bought one of these. I asked Nam, he's ordering some more of these, I hear through the grapevine. So I asked him to order me one of these sound boxes too, because they're awesome for the office. So yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much. And for those of you who are watching, thank you for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next event and continuing to build the community here in Honolulu. What we're going to do next is we're going to open up to our audience for some Q&A. So let's see what we have here.
Cool. Are there people listening?
Yeah, we do. We've got a few.
Okay, good.
So let's see here. Let's see. Okay. Let me unmute some of our audience members just so we can get any questions that people might have.
Oh, we get to hear them?
We'll get to hear them. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Through the owl speaker here.
I think so. Yeah.
Looks like an owl. Shot. Actually, now that you mention it, I know the guys who founded Owl.
You do? I
do. I think that they were in the Valley at the same time we were, and we're looking at some of the same fab facilities we were looking at. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. It looks like we've got one question here. You guys can go ahead and shout it out if you guys want to do it that way, or you can type it in the box.
It's Kirk here.
Oh, hey, Kirk.
Hi. I used to work for VA Linux Systems when they were doing their SourceForge open source platform. Do you think that you want to continue to own the hardware side and the software side, or are you going to eventually concentrate on the software and license out to more hardware manufacturers so you can actually grow faster or bigger?
If you would like to buy our hardware business, I will sell it to you for $1. Yeah, we very much want to be a hardware only business. You know, we would love to have smart speaker vendors out there who, you know, understand the supply chain risk that they've got with you know, Google and Amazon, to stand up and say, hey, you know, we want to support a third direction. You know, ultimately, you know, a smart speaker those two companies are dominating smart speaker sales. When you talk to companies that have partnered with them, well, there's several that I can think of that, where in at least one case, Amazon made an investment in the company and then stood up a product that directly competed with them and put them out of business, right? Those are not good partners for the smart speaker industry. They will stab you, kill you, and eat you. And so I think that, smart speaker companies would be really well served to start working with open alternatives. And we would love to hear from anybody at, Bose, JBL, Harman Kardon, Sonos, all of those companies have a lot of supply chain risks with Amazon and Google, and we would love to support their platforms.
Right.
Awesome.
I got a question. Hey, Joe. Josh, sorry. My question, actually, I have like a lot of questions, a whole page here. I think the retail navigation actually is a really interesting idea. I was at Home Depot was my nightmare, and I wonder if there's a way to kind of like Strava it, where people kind of make their own points of like, the nails go here, and kind of build up the own map, so you don't have to go through Home Depot and the like. But that's just a thought.
They publish the aisles and bin numbers on their website now. So when you're in the store, you can load their app or their website and search for what you want. And then if you browse, it's just kind of a pain,
It's a total pain. It's a shitty map.
Well, that, and you're in a giant metal building, using high frequency microwave, so your phone inevitably, doesn't work, and then their Wi-Fi is really spotty, and so it's really frustrating. And yeah, I'd love to have like a little kiosk at the end of the aisle that you could go up and ask. And and one of the things that we identified as part of that project that was great was that I know where the customer's standing, right? Because I know which speaker he's talking to, and I know where he is going, and I know what he's looking for. And so in the case of a grocery store, the person who walks up and says, "Where's the pie tins?" Right? That guy probably wants to buy Libby's pumpkin pie filling and Pillsbury pie crust, right? And so why not give those brands an opportunity to drive them to a sale with a little coupon as part of that query? So there's a really obvious advertising, and that's a coupon that the customer gets value at, right? It's not some kind of come on that you're trying to sell them something they don't want. If they're looking for pie tins, they probably are going to make use of those coupons, right? And so yeah, I miss it every time I'm in the store. Clearly, I've given it a lot of thought.
I wonder if you can incorporate Mycroft speakers like in the corners or like in different parts of the store, and say, hey, my phone's not working too well, or the phone's out of batteries. Where can I find this, and this? Because it's a pain trying to find people.
It's one of the things we've been talking to the big boxes about, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That actually wasn't my question. My real question is, we did a Reg CF for the hub,
Mm-hmm.
and we raised $173,000 to open a second location. Ultimately, decided to back out of it, but it still was a pretty amazing experience. And I'm just curious, how was the second round different for you, or how will it be different so far? And why did you choose the startengine.com?
Okay, so the second round has been a lot easier to get the momentum going through because we have a much bigger community, and we do have a lot of traction as a company. And then finally, the smart speaker market's grown substantially since we did our first one, and so it's. I cannot tell you how frustrating it was to go and try to explain to people what a smart speaker was while, we were looking at it and realizing that it was going to be like a $30 billion market. So anyway, so that stuff has become a lot easier. We selected Start Engine. I'll be honest, the devil, we went through the original Reg CF with Start Engine, reached our maximum. With any platform, there are going to be challenges along the way. We felt pretty good about the way that Start Engine handled the challenges that we experienced during the first campaign. And, in this campaign, they've been great to work with, and we're looking forward to pushing it all the way to 5 million. That's exciting.
Right on. And then just, I'm looking at your startengine.com right now on your website, or on, I guess, the Mycroft AI Start Engine website. I'm curious if you can give me your 30-second pitch.
Sure. So, there's a couple of different pitches, let's start with the privacy pitch, right? Smart speakers are the fastest growing segment of the technology sector. 20% of people out there who want smart speakers are holding back on purchasing one because of the privacy aspects. There are no other companies in this market that can credibly address that segment. Nobody is ever going to believe that Google is going to give people privacy. It's Mycroft's opportunity to lose. We've got a proven track record, and we've got $1 million in pre-orders and are ready to start shipping globally. So that's exciting. The other pitch is, in the 1990s, it was possible to make 1,000x multiples by investing early in companies as they went public. Those opportunities ended with Sarbanes-Oxley. And so, Regulation CF crowdfunding is now a way that individual shareholders can invest in early stage technology companies at a point where they can make the types of returns that Silicon Valley venture capitalists can make. Mycroft's a great opportunity, and we think that people will do well to invest.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Hey, thank you.
What's your marketing plan going to be to grow? Are you just doing deals one-on-one with your potential partners? You said you were shipping to 50 countries, but didn't give like a unit number for how many units you're actually selling.
So we got 1 million pre-orders. That's right around 5,000 units. We're planning on, in the first year, standing up 5,000 units a month in sales. Right now, we are actually turning down sales. We have everybody from hospital systems to defense contractors that are looking to deploy smart speakers that provide in hospital systems HIPAA-compliant privacy for their patient rooms at the DoD, things that they can run on the high side without calling the internet. Going forward, the goal is to partner with retailers who see Amazon as an existential threat. And frankly, any retailer that does not see Amazon as an existential threat at this point is going to be a retailer that won't be here 20 years from now. And making sure that they have the ability to provide voice services within their customers' homes so that their customers can create things like shopping lists and order products shipped to the door. So we think that that's a pretty slam dunk approach. So there's probably about a dozen companies around the world that we want to work with. And then, of course, hundreds of millions of customers for those companies. And that's really what we're aiming for.
So does that mean you, if you have all these customers who want to add additional value, does that mean you own the big brain, or do they own their own big brains?
So we have, you mean the back end for the smart speakers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is an open source license, but in order for commercial use, they need to pay a licensing fee. So they will own the data and they will own the brain, but they will pay us a licensing fee for using it. Probably per customer licensing fee, along with a per smart speaker licensing fee, even if it's a very small number.
So isn't there a danger that that could break your pledge to be secure?
Anything that carries a Mycroft logo on it will carry our privacy guarantee. As an open source company, we can't control how other people use our software. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there using our software in ways that we wouldn't like now. But if it's got our logo on it, customers can be assured that it meets our privacy guidelines.
Okay. Were there any other questions?
Yeah, quickly, what was the name of the Alzheimer's company that your mom started?
Tailored Care. It may have changed its name to T-Care, but actually I think it's at Tailored Care. It's out of St. Louis. Ali Ahmadi's running it. Ali's a fantastic entrepreneur who I'd been working with as a mentee, and stepped in to take that company and has done a great job with it.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? All right. Well, we want to thank Joshua so much for coming to chat with us today and share your story. Really appreciate it. We're hoping to have you back in person.
Yeah, we'll come back and we'll have we'll all break bread and have tea together. It's the end of the pandemic is coming someday.
I love that. Yes, I'm optimistic too.
We will be able to go to rock concerts again someday.
Something to dream about.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone. We look forward to having you join us next time. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Josh. Good.
Appreciate it.
I'll see you in Kona.
Soon.
I live here.
Oh yeah, we'll come visit.
Where are you at?
That's a good question.